Hey there, history lovers. If you're getting ready to drift off, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's travel back in time. Tonight's story begins with Frau Trophia, a simple housewife who would unknowingly trigger the deadliest dance party in human history. Imagine the cobblestone streets of 1518 Strasbourg, where the smell of fresh bread mixed with sewage, and where a woman's uncontrollable dancing would soon turn an entire city into a graveyard. This is the real story of the dancing plague, and it's far stranger, darker, and more human than the myths you've heard. Picture this. It's a sweltering July morning in 1518, and Frau Trophia steps out of her modest timber-framed house like any other day. She's probably thinking about breakfast, maybe worried about her husband's work, completely unaware that in just a few hours, she'll become patient zero of the most bizarre epidemic in recorded history. Now, I want you to really visualize medieval Strasbourg. This isn't some romantic fairy tale city. We're talking about narrow, winding streets filled with horse manure, open sewers running down the middle of roads, and the constant smell of unwashed bodies and rotting food. Houses lean so close together that neighbors can literally reach out their windows and shake hands. The Holy Roman Empire is dealing with crop failures, religious tensions are through the roof, and people are constantly on edge about everything from demons to the end times. Into this powder keg of anxiety and superstition walks our protagonist, Frau Trophia, whose first name history has cruelly forgotten, but whose last name would become synonymous with one of the weirdest events human civilization has ever recorded. And here's where it gets absolutely insane, because around mid-morning, for reasons that no one then or now can fully explain, Frau Trophia just starts dancing. Not celebration dancing, not wedding dancing, not even drunk dancing. We're talking about violent, uncontrollable, convulsive dancing right there in the middle of the street. Her arms are flailing wildly, her feet are stomping and sliding across the rough cobblestones, and she's spinning and jerking like someone's puppeteering her body against her will. Imagine trying to explain this to someone today. Hey, so this lady just started dancing and couldn't stop. You'd probably think she was having some kind of seizure or mental breakdown, right? But here's the thing that makes this story absolutely mind-blowing. She doesn't stop. Hour after hour, Frau Trophia keeps dancing. The sun moves across the sky, merchants close their shops to come watch, children gather in circles around her, and still she dances. Her dress becomes soaked with sweat, her breathing becomes labored, but her body just won't quit moving. By the time the sun starts setting, word has spread throughout the entire city that something very, very wrong is happening in the central square. And this is where our story takes a turn from weird to absolutely terrifying, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about human psychology, mass hysteria, and just how spectacularly wrong medical advice can go. Because instead of getting better, instead of Frau Trophia finally collapsing and ending this bizarre episode, something much worse is about to happen. Something that will turn a single woman's mysterious affliction into a citywide catastrophe that kills hundreds of people and changes our understanding of the human mind forever. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into the social conditions, medical ignorance, and psychological perfect storm that created the dancing plague of 1518. Hey there, history lovers. If you're getting ready to drift off, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's travel back in time. Tonight's story begins with Frau Trophia, a simple housewife who would unknowingly trigger the deadliest dance party in human history. Imagine the cobblestone streets of 1518 Strasbourg, where the smell of fresh bread mixed with sewage, and where a woman's uncontrollable dancing would soon turn an entire city into a graveyard. This is the real story of the dancing plague, and it's far stranger, darker, and more human than the myths you've heard. Picture this. It's a sweltering July morning in 1518, and Frau Trophia steps out of her modest timber-framed house like any other day. She's probably thinking about breakfast, maybe worried about her husband's work, completely unaware that in just a few hours, she'll become patient zero of the most bizarre epidemic in recorded history. Now, I want you to really visualize medieval Strasbourg. This isn't some romantic fairy tale city. We're talking about narrow, winding streets filled with horse manure, open sewers running down the middle of roads, and the constant smell of unwashed bodies and rotting food. Houses lean so close together that neighbors can literally reach out their windows and shake hands. The Holy Roman Empire is dealing with crop failures, religious tensions are through the roof, and people are constantly on edge about everything from demons to the end times. Into this powder keg of anxiety and superstition walks our protagonist, Frau Trophia, whose first name history has cruelly forgotten, but whose last name would become synonymous with one of the weirdest events human civilization has ever recorded. And here's where it gets absolutely insane, because around mid-morning, for reasons that no one then or now can fully explain, Frau Trophia just starts dancing. Not celebration dancing, not wedding dancing, not even drunk dancing. We're talking about violent, uncontrollable, convulsive dancing right there in the middle of the street. Her arms are flailing wildly, her feet are stomping and sliding across the rough cobblestones, and she's spinning and jerking like someone's puppeteering her body against her will. Imagine trying to explain this to someone today. Hey, so this lady just started dancing and couldn't stop. You'd probably think she was having some kind of seizure or mental breakdown, right? But here's the thing that makes this story absolutely mind-blowing. She doesn't stop. Hour after hour, Frau Trophia keeps dancing. The sun moves across the sky, merchants close their shops to come watch, children gather in circles around her, and still she dances. Her dress becomes soaked with sweat, her breathing becomes labored, but her body just won't quit moving. By the time the sun starts setting, word has spread throughout the entire city that something very, very wrong is happening in the central square. And this is where our story takes a turn from weird to absolutely terrifying, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about human psychology, mass hysteria, and just how spectacularly wrong medical advice can go. Because instead of getting better, instead of Frau Trophia finally collapsing and ending this bizarre episode, something much worse is about to happen. Something that will turn a single woman's mysterious affliction into a citywide catastrophe that kills hundreds of people and changes our understanding of the human mind forever. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into the social conditions, medical ignorance, and psychological perfect storm that created the dancing plague of 1518. Let's take a moment to really appreciate just how completely insane medieval culture was, because understanding their worldview is crucial to grasping why everyone's about to make the worst possible decisions about Frau Trophia's dancing problem. First off, medieval people genuinely believed that your personality and health were controlled by the position of the stars, the phase of the moon, and the balance of mysterious fluids sloshing around inside your body. And I'm not talking about fringe conspiracy theorists here, I'm talking about the most educated, respected doctors and scholars of the time. Picture going to your doctor today and having them seriously tell you that your depression is caused by too much melancholy humor pooling in your spleen, and the cure is to eat more hot peppers and maybe get bled by some leeches. That's essentially the level of medical sophistication we're dealing with in 1518, except everyone thinks this is cutting-edge science. The theory of the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, wasn't just some quaint folk belief, it was literally the foundation of all medical practice, and doctors would confidently diagnose and treat patients based on which imaginary fluid they thought was out of balance. Too much blood? Time for some bloodletting. Too much phlegm? Let's make you vomit. Can't stop dancing? Well, obviously your blood has become overheated and needs to be cooled down through vigorous physical activity. Yes, you heard that right, the medical establishment is about to prescribe more dancing as a cure for uncontrollable dancing. But wait, it gets even better, because alongside this sophisticated medical theory, people also genuinely believe that diseases can be caused by everything from looking at someone the wrong way to eating food during an eclipse. We're talking about a culture where trained physicians will seriously debate whether your toothache is caused by tiny worms eating your teeth from the inside or by the malevolent influence of Saturn, and both explanations are considered equally scientific. Dancing, in particular, has a very complicated place in medieval culture. On one hand, it's associated with celebration, fertility, and community bonding, but on the other hand, it's also linked to paganism, sexual impropriety, and demonic possession. The Catholic Church has spent centuries trying to stamp out inappropriate dancing, especially the kind that gets too wild or ecstatic, because they believe it opens people up to supernatural influence. There are literally church documents from this period describing dancing as a gateway to demon possession, with detailed instructions for priests on how to identify when someone's dancing has crossed the line from innocent fun to spiritual corruption. And speaking of demons, let's talk about demonology for a hot second, because in 1518 belief in supernatural forces isn't some fringe superstition, it's mainstream intellectual thought. People genuinely believe that demons are constantly walking around looking for opportunities to possess humans, and that certain activities, locations, and even thoughts can make you vulnerable to spiritual attack. Dancing until you collapse from exhaustion? That's not a medical emergency, that's clear evidence of demonic intervention. The fact that it started with one woman and seems to be spreading? Well, obviously we're dealing with either a curse, a punishment from God, or a coordinated attack by evil spirits. Now you might be thinking, surely the educated elite knew better, but here's the thing, the educated elite are the ones who wrote all the books about demons and humors and astrological medicine. The University of Strasbourg is literally teaching courses on how planetary alignments affect bodily fluids, and the city's most respected physicians have extensive libraries full of texts explaining how to diagnose possession versus natural illness. This isn't ignorance, this is sophisticated intellectual framework that just happens to be completely wrong about almost everything. So when Frau Trophia starts her uncontrollable dancing, she's not just dealing with whatever psychological or neurological condition is actually affecting her, she's also walking into a cultural minefield where her symptoms will be interpreted through layers of medical theory, religious doctrine, and supernatural belief that are guaranteed to make everything worse. Because in a world where the most educated people genuinely believe that dancing can be caused by overheated blood and cured with more dancing, where demons are considered a legitimate medical diagnosis, and where the alignment of the stars is thought to influence your digestive system, rational problem solving isn't really an option. The stage is set for a perfect storm of good intentions, bad science, and catastrophic decision-making that's about to turn one woman's mysterious affliction into a city-wide disaster that kills hundreds of people and traumatizes an entire generation. So here's where our story really begins, and I want you to picture this scene in excruciating detail because it's about to become the most consequential dance performance in human history. It's July 14, 1518, sometime around mid-morning, and Frau Trophia steps out of her house into the narrow street like she's done thousands of times before. Except today, something is very, very wrong. Now, we don't know exactly what triggered it. Maybe she got some bad news, maybe she had a mental breakdown, maybe she ate some moldy grain that caused hallucinations, or maybe she was just the unlucky winner of history's weirdest lottery. But suddenly, without any warning or explanation, Frau Trophia just starts dancing. And when I say dancing, I don't mean she starts humming a little tune and doing a gentle waltz. I'm talking about violent, convulsive, uncontrollable movement that looks more like a seizure than anything you'd see at a medieval wedding. Her arms are flailing wildly above her head, her feet are stomping and sliding across the cobblestones with such force that you can hear the impact echoing off the surrounding buildings, and her whole body is jerking and spinning like she's being controlled by some invisible puppeteer who's having a seizure of their own. The first people to notice are her immediate neighbors, who probably stick their heads out their windows thinking there's some kind of commotion in the street. Maybe a fight, maybe a fire, maybe someone's being attacked. But instead they see Frau Trophia dancing with such intensity that it's genuinely frightening to watch. Picture trying to describe this scene to someone today. So this middle-aged woman just started dancing in the street and won't stop. It sounds like the setup to a joke, right? But the people watching aren't laughing because what they're seeing doesn't look voluntary or joyful or celebratory. It looks like someone's body has been hijacked by forces beyond their control. Her face isn't showing the happiness you'd expect from someone dancing. Instead, witnesses report seeing expressions of confusion, exhaustion, and what can only be described as terror, as if she's just as bewildered by what's happening to her body as everyone else watching. As word spreads through the neighborhood that something weird is happening in the street, more and more people start gathering to witness this bizarre spectacle. Remember, this is 1518. There's no television, no internet, no entertainment industry, so when something unusual happens in your neighborhood, it becomes the most interesting thing that's happened in months. People are abandoning their work, leaving their shops, pulling their children away from their chores to come see the woman who can't stop dancing. And as the crowd grows, so does the sense that this isn't just some eccentric behavior. This is something supernatural and potentially dangerous. The medieval mind immediately starts looking for explanations that fit their worldview. Is she possessed by demons? Is this some kind of divine punishment? Has someone cursed her? Is this a sign of the end times? Because in their understanding of the world, people don't just spontaneously start dancing uncontrollably for no reason. There has to be a spiritual or medical cause, and neither option is particularly comforting. What makes this even more unsettling for the growing crowd is that Frau Trophia shows no signs of stopping or even slowing down. Hours pass, the sun moves across the sky, people come and go from the crowd, but she just keeps dancing with the same frantic intensity. Her clothes become soaked with sweat, her breathing becomes labored and desperate, but her body continues its relentless, violent movement across the cobblestones. Some people in the crowd start shouting at her, trying to get her attention, trying to snap her out of whatever trance she's in, but she seems completely unable to hear them or respond to their calls. It's like she's trapped inside her own body, forced to watch helplessly as her limbs continue their exhausting, painful dance. By afternoon, the crowd has grown so large that it's actually disrupting traffic through the street, and local authorities start taking notice of what's happening. Shop owners are complaining that people are abandoning their businesses to watch the dancing woman, parents are worried about the effect this disturbing spectacle might have on their children, and religious leaders are starting to whisper about whether this might be some kind of divine sign or demonic intervention. The atmosphere in the crowd is shifting from curiosity to genuine concern to outright fear, because it's becoming clear that whatever's happening to Frau Trophia isn't going to resolve itself naturally. And this is where the story takes its first disastrous turn toward tragedy, because instead of recognizing this as a medical emergency that requires careful observation and treatment, the authorities are about to make a series of decisions based on medieval medical theory that will transform one woman's mysterious affliction into the deadliest dance party in human history. As Frau Trophia's relentless dancing stretches from hours into what's starting to feel like an eternity, the crowd's reaction begins to shift in ways that perfectly illustrate just how quickly rational thinking can spiral into collective madness. Initially, people are treating this like a fascinating sideshow. Medieval Strasbourg doesn't exactly have a lot of entertainment options, so a woman dancing uncontrollably in the street is basically the equivalent of primetime television. Merchants are closing their shops early to come watch, children are being lifted onto their fathers' shoulders for a better view, and there's almost a carnival atmosphere as people share theories about what might be causing this bizarre behavior. Some folks are making jokes, suggesting maybe Frau Trophia discovered a particularly good batch of wine, while others are placing bets on how long she can keep going before she collapses from exhaustion. But as the day wears on and it becomes increasingly obvious that this isn't some voluntary performance that's going to end with applause and tips, the mood of the crowd starts to change dramatically. The laughter dies down as people begin to realize they're witnessing something genuinely disturbing. A human being who appears to be trapped inside her own body, unable to control her movements, unable to rest, unable to escape whatever force is compelling her to continue this violent, exhausting dance. Whispers start spreading through the crowd about whether they should intervene somehow, but nobody really knows what to do because they've never seen anything like this before. Medieval people might believe in demons and divine punishment, but they rarely see it happening right in front of them in broad daylight, and the reality of witnessing what appears to be supernatural possession is far more unsettling than the theoretical discussions they've heard in church. As evening approaches and Frau Trophia shows no signs of stopping, some people in the crowd begin to report feeling strange. It starts small. A few individuals mention feeling lightheaded or experiencing an odd urge to move their feet in rhythm with Frau Trophia's dancing. At first, these reports are dismissed as imagination or sympathy reactions, the kind of thing that happens when you stare at something too intensely for too long. But then something absolutely terrifying happens. Other people start dancing. Not many at first, maybe 3 or 4 individuals scattered throughout the crowd suddenly find themselves unable to control their own movements, their bodies beginning to jerk and sway in the same violent, convulsive manner that has possessed Frau Trophia. The crowd's reaction to this development is immediate and visceral panic. What started as a curious spectacle has suddenly become a contagious nightmare, and people begin backing away from the dancing figures, covering their children's eyes, making the sign of the cross, and frantically debating whether they should flee the area entirely or stay to help somehow. The medieval mind immediately jumps to the worst possible explanations. This must be demonic possession spreading through the crowd, or perhaps a curse that's being transmitted through sight, or maybe divine punishment for some collective sin that the entire city has committed. Religious authorities who have been observing from the edges of the crowd start reciting prayers and calling for exorcisms, while more practically minded citizens begin organizing efforts to physically restrain the dancers, though they quickly discover that people in the grip of this dancing compulsion possess almost superhuman strength and seem completely impervious to pain or exhaustion. The families of the newly affected dancers are absolutely beside themselves. Imagine watching your spouse, your parent, your sibling suddenly lose control of their body and begin dancing with the same terrifying intensity that has been consuming Frau Trophia all day. They're screaming, crying, begging their loved ones to stop, to respond, to give some sign that they're still conscious and aware inside their convulsing bodies, but the dancers seem completely disconnected from the world around them, lost in some internal rhythm that no one else can hear or understand. As night falls on this first day of what will become known as the Dancing Plague, the crowd has swollen to include nearly half the city's population, all gathered around this growing group of uncontrollable dancers. The atmosphere is charged with fear, confusion, and a growing sense that whatever is happening here is beyond human understanding or control. People are sending runners to fetch doctors, priests, and city officials, while others are already talking about evacuating their families from the area before whatever curse or contagion is affecting these dancers spreads even further. And this is where the story takes its next catastrophic turn, because instead of recognizing this as a case of mass hysteria that requires careful psychological intervention, the authorities are about to arrive with medieval medical knowledge and make decisions that will transform a handful of dancing victims into hundreds of corpses. The stage is set for one of the most spectacular failures of medical judgment in human history, and the death toll is about to start climbing rapidly. When the city officials and medical authorities finally arrive on the scene, you'd think that having trained professionals involved would improve the situation, but oh boy, are you in for a treat, because what happens next is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about expert decision-making. The first to respond are the local physicians, who show up with their fancy robes, their leather-bound medical texts, and an absolutely unshakable confidence in medieval medical theory that would be hilarious if it weren't about to get people killed. These aren't village-wise women or folk healers. These are university-educated doctors with degrees from prestigious institutions, men who have spent years studying the most advanced medical knowledge of their time, and they take one look at Frau Trophia and her growing group of fellow dancers and immediately arrive at what they consider a perfectly logical diagnosis. According to the theory of the four humors, which remember is the cutting-edge medical science of 1518, the uncontrollable dancing is clearly being caused by hot blood. Essentially, the dancer's blood has become overheated, creating an excess of sanguine humor that is forcing their bodies into violent motion as a way of trying to cool down and restore balance. Now, if you were a modern doctor and you diagnosed someone with hot blood, you'd probably prescribe rest, hydration, maybe some cooling measures, and definitely a psychiatric evaluation, but medieval physicians have a very different approach to treatment. Their logic goes like this. If the dancing is being caused by overheated blood that needs to be cooled, then the best way to cool the blood is through continued vigorous physical activity, which will eventually exhaust the excess heat and allow the humors to return to their natural balance. In other words, the official medical recommendation for people who can't stop dancing is more dancing. I want you to really appreciate the breathtaking wrongness of this decision, because it's like treating someone who's drowning by throwing them into deeper water, or curing someone's insomnia by feeding them espresso, but the doctors are absolutely convinced they're applying sound scientific principles based on centuries of medical wisdom. They explain to the gathered crowd that fighting against the dancing or trying to restrain the victims will only trap the hot blood inside their bodies, making the condition worse and potentially causing the excess heat to attack vital organs like the heart or brain. The only safe and effective treatment, they insist, is to allow the dancing to continue until the victims' bodies naturally exhaust the imbalanced humors and return to health. The city magistrates, who are desperate for any kind of authoritative guidance in this unprecedented crisis, immediately embrace the doctor's recommendations and begin organizing what they consider to be a medically supervised treatment program. They order the construction of a wooden stage in the city's main square, reasoning that if dancing is the cure, then the victim should have a proper space to dance safely and effectively. They hire professional musicians, flute players, drummers, and troubadours, to provide energetic music that will help the dancers maintain their therapeutic rhythm, because apparently in medieval medical logic, if some dancing is good medicine, then well-coordinated dancing with professional musical accompaniment must be even better medicine. The authorities also begin recruiting volunteers to monitor the dancers around the clock, ensuring that they don't injure themselves while they work through their medical treatment, and they set up food and water stations nearby so that the dancers can maintain their strength during what the doctors predict will be several days of intensive therapeutic dancing. As word spreads through the city that the medical authorities have officially diagnosed the dancing as a treatable condition and prescribed more dancing as the cure, something absolutely predictable and terrifying happens. More people start dancing. And this makes perfect sense from a medieval psychology perspective, because if the most educated, respected experts in the city are saying that dancing is not only safe but actually medically beneficial, then people who were previously fighting against any dancing urges suddenly feel permission to let themselves go. Individuals who had been experiencing mild symptoms, maybe some restlessness, maybe some involuntary foot tapping, maybe just feeling emotionally overwhelmed by the whole situation, suddenly find themselves joining the official dancing treatment program, convinced that they're doing something therapeutic rather than something dangerous. The families of the original dancers are initially relieved by the professional medical intervention, grateful that their loved ones are now receiving proper care from qualified experts rather than being treated as victims of supernatural forces. The religious authorities, while still concerned about potential spiritual implications, defer to the medical diagnosis and begin offering prayers for the success of the treatment rather than calling for exorcisms or divine intervention. And the general population, who had been growing increasingly panicked about contagious demonic possession, start to calm down now that they have a rational, scientific explanation for what's happening and a clear treatment plan from medical professionals. This is the moment when the dancing plague transforms from a localized psychological crisis into a city-sanctioned medical disaster, because instead of containing and treating a handful of people suffering from mass hysteria, the authorities have just created the perfect conditions for that hysteria to spread exponentially through official encouragement and medical legitimacy. What happens next is so monumentally stupid that it would be unbelievable if we didn't have actual historical records documenting every ridiculous detail. The city authorities don't just stick with their original plan of letting people dance until they're cured. Oh no, they decide to go full medieval. They turn this medical disaster into what can only be described as a municipally sponsored death rave. Within days of the doctor's initial diagnosis, the city council approves funding for what they're calling a therapeutic dancing facility. This is basically a large wooden stage constructed in the main market square. It's specifically designed to accommodate dozens of dancers simultaneously. They want to provide optimal conditions for their medical treatment. They hire not just one or two musicians, but an entire ensemble of professional performers. We're talking flautists, drummers, bagpipers, and even some early violin players. These musicians are given specific instructions to maintain an energetic, driving rhythm. This will help the dancers achieve maximum therapeutic benefit from their prescribed physical activity. The city literally puts these musicians on the municipal payroll as medical staff. They're paying them the same wages they would give to doctors or nurses. In the minds of 1518 Strasbourg officials, music therapy is just as important as any other medical intervention. But wait, it gets even more absurd. The authorities decide that if dancing is medicine, then clearly they need to optimize the dosage and delivery method. Just like any other pharmaceutical treatment, they establish official dancing schedules. Different groups of dancers are assigned to specific time slots throughout the day and night. This ensures continuous therapeutic activity and prevents overcrowding on the stage. They create a rotating shift system where fresh musicians replace tired ones every few hours. This maintains constant musical energy to support the dancers' medical needs. They even hire supervisors whose job is to monitor the dancers' technique. These supervisors encourage more vigorous movement when someone appears to be underdancing their prescribed treatment. The city also starts recruiting volunteers to serve as dancing assistants. These are basically people whose job is to help exhausted dancers maintain their therapeutic rhythm. They provide physical support, encouragement, and occasionally lift collapsed dancers back to their feet. This way the dancers can continue their medical treatment. These assistants are given official badges. They're considered essential medical personnel. They have instructions to report any dancers who appear to be resisting their treatment, or trying to stop dancing before their humors have been properly balanced. As word spreads throughout the region about Strasbourg's innovative medical approach to the dancing condition, other cities send delegations. These delegations want to observe these cutting-edge treatment methods. Several neighboring towns actually request copies of the treatment protocols. They want to implement similar programs if the dancing plague spreads to their populations. The whole thing becomes a source of civic pride for Strasbourg. City leaders brag about their progressive medical facilities. They boast about their commitment to providing the most advanced healthcare available in the Holy Roman Empire. Meanwhile, the actual dancers are deteriorating rapidly. We're talking about people who have now been dancing continuously for days. Their feet are bleeding through their shoes. Their bodies are covered in bruises from collisions with each other and falls onto the wooden stage. Their faces show clear signs of dehydration, malnutrition, and complete physical exhaustion. But whenever family members or concerned citizens point out that the dancers appear to be suffering rather than healing, the medical authorities have an explanation. They explain that this is a normal part of the treatment process. They compare it to how other medical procedures like bloodletting or purging can be temporarily uncomfortable. But ultimately these procedures restore health. The doctors actually start giving lectures to worried families. They explain that the apparent suffering is evidence that the treatment is working. As the excess hot blood is being expelled through vigorous physical activity, the patients naturally experience some discomfort. This happens as their humoral balance is restored. They warn families that interfering with the treatment could be dangerous. Trying to force the dancers to stop could potentially trap the heated humors inside the body. This might cause more serious medical complications. The city even starts charging admission for people who want to observe the dancing treatment. They market it as both a medical curiosity and a form of entertainment. The proceeds go to fund expanded treatment facilities and additional medical staff. Local taverns begin advertising dancing viewing parties. Patrons can eat, drink, and watch the therapeutic dancing. They can learn about cutting-edge medical science from university-educated physicians. These physicians provide running commentary on the treatment progress. By this point, what started as a single woman's mysterious condition has become a full-scale municipal industry. Dozens of people are employed in various aspects of the dancing treatment program. There are official city policies governing the management of dancing patients. The city has a growing reputation that's attracting visitors from across Europe. These visitors want to witness this revolutionary medical breakthrough. And here's the really terrifying part. It's working exactly as intended from a medieval medical perspective. More and more people are joining the dancing treatment program. The doctors interpret this as evidence that their diagnosis was correct. Their treatment is successfully drawing out the hot blood condition from throughout the population. The stage is set for what happens next. This medically sanctioned dancing program is about to transform from a misguided treatment into a full-scale catastrophe. It will kill hundreds of people and traumatize an entire city. And here's where this medieval medical disaster takes its first truly horrifying turn. Because while the doctors are congratulating themselves on their innovative treatment approach, people are starting to die. Not just getting sick, not just getting injured, actually dying from dancing. The first death happens on the 4th day of the therapeutic dancing program. A middle-aged baker named Wilhelm, who joined the dancing after experiencing what he thought were early symptoms of the hot blood condition. He's been dancing continuously for nearly 3 days straight. His family has been bringing him water and food. They've been cheering him on. They've been following the doctor's advice about not interfering with his medical treatment. Then, around midday, while performing what witnesses describe as particularly vigorous spinning movements, Wilhelm just stops. Not gradually. Not slowly winding down like you'd expect someone to do when they're tired. He stops mid-spin. His eyes roll back in his head. He collapses face first onto the wooden stage. And he's dead before his body hits the ground. The musicians keep playing. The other dancers keep dancing. The crowd keeps watching. Because nobody really understands what just happened. The medical supervisors rush over to examine Wilhelm's body. They check for breathing. They check for a pulse. They try various medieval resuscitation techniques. But it's clear that he's gone. The doctors quickly huddle together to discuss this unexpected development. Their conclusion? Wilhelm's treatment was successful. His humors have been balanced. His hot blood has been cooled. His body has achieved such perfect equilibrium that his soul was able to peacefully depart. They announced to the gathered crowd that Wilhelm's death is actually a positive outcome. It proves that the dancing treatment works. His humors were so severely imbalanced that only death could restore proper balance. They assure everyone that this is a rare but known complication of advanced hot blood syndrome. Most patients will recover without dying. Wilhelm just had a particularly severe case. The families of the other dancers are not exactly comforted by this explanation, but the medical authorities are insistent. They warn that stopping the treatment now would be disrespectful to Wilhelm's sacrifice. It could also endanger the other patients who are still working through their own humoral imbalances. So the dancing continues. The music continues. The municipal support continues. And over the next few days, more people start dying. A teenage girl collapses from what modern doctors would recognize as severe dehydration and cardiac arrhythmia. An elderly man suffers what's clearly a heart attack brought on by days of continuous physical exertion. A pregnant woman miscarries after 4 days of violent dancing, then dies from blood loss. Each death is explained away by the medical authorities as either successful treatment or evidence of pre-existing conditions. The doctors develop increasingly elaborate theories about different types of hot blood syndrome. Some types can be cured through dancing. Other types are so severe that only death can provide relief. They start categorizing the dancers into different treatment groups. Based on their symptoms, their social class, their age, and their apparent dancing ability. They create treatment protocols for each category. Some dancers are prescribed more vigorous dancing. Others are given gentle therapeutic movement. Still others are subjected to combination treatments involving dancing, bloodletting, and purging. The city officials, meanwhile, are facing their first serious political crisis since this whole situation began. Families of the dead dancers are demanding answers. Some are calling for the dancing program to be shut down. Others are threatening to leave the city entirely. Religious leaders are starting to question whether the medical authorities have been misinterpreting divine signs. There are whispers that maybe this isn't a medical condition at all. Maybe it's supernatural punishment. Maybe it's demonic possession. Maybe the whole dancing treatment program has been making things worse instead of better. But the doctors double down on their medical theories. They argue that the deaths prove how serious the hot blood epidemic really is. Without proper treatment, they claim the death toll would be much higher. They point to the dozens of dancers who are still alive as evidence that their treatment is saving lives. They warned that abandoning the program now would be medically irresponsible. It could lead to a citywide outbreak of untreated hot blood syndrome. The city council finds itself in an impossible position. They've invested significant resources in the dancing treatment program. They've staked their reputation on supporting cutting-edge medical science. They've marketed their city as a center of medical innovation. Admitting that the treatment might be harmful would mean acknowledging that they've been responsible for killing their own citizens. So they choose to believe the doctors. They continue funding the program. They continue supporting the medical authorities. They continue encouraging people with dancing symptoms to seek treatment. And the death toll continues to climb. What started as a single woman's mysterious condition has now become a city-sanctioned killing machine, disguised as medical treatment, supported by scientific theory, endorsed by political authorities, and completely immune to rational criticism. Because questioning the treatment means questioning the entire foundation of medieval medical knowledge. And nobody is prepared to do that. Not yet. Just when you think this story can't possibly get any weirder, the city of Strasbourg manages to outdo itself in the most spectacular way imaginable. Because apparently having a dozen people dance themselves to death wasn't enough of a crisis. The authorities decide they need to scale up their operation. By the second week of August, the number of active dancers has grown from the original handful to over 400 people. 400. That's roughly 2% of the entire city's population. All dancing simultaneously. All the time. Imagine Times Square on New Year's Eve, except instead of celebrating for a few hours, everyone is dancing non-stop for weeks. And instead of being happy, they're slowly dying of exhaustion. The original wooden stage becomes completely inadequate for this number of dancers. So the city constructs additional platforms throughout the market square. They create what essentially amounts to a medieval dance complex. Multiple stages, multiple bands, multiple supervisory teams. It's like Coachella but with a 100% fatality rate. The musicians, who initially were enthusiastic about their important medical work, are now working around-the-clock shifts. They're exhausted. Their hands are bleeding from playing instruments for hours on end. Some of them are developing hearing damage from the constant noise. But the medical authorities insist that interrupting the musical therapy could be catastrophic for the dancers' health. So the music never stops. Day and night. Drums, flutes, bagpipes, and early violins creating this relentless, driving rhythm that echoes throughout the entire city. Nobody in Strasbourg is getting any sleep. The sound of 400 people dancing to continuous medieval music carries for miles. But here's where it gets truly insane. The doctors notice that the dancing seems to be more effective when the dancers are performing in larger groups. Their medical theory evolves. Now they believe that hot blood syndrome creates a kind of sympathetic resonance between patients. The more dancers you have in one location, the more efficiently their humors can be balanced. It's like medieval medical physics. They start actively recruiting new dancers. They send teams throughout the city looking for people who might be showing early symptoms of hot blood syndrome. Restlessness, anxiety, difficulty sleeping. Basically, any sign of stress or unhappiness becomes a potential medical condition requiring immediate dancing treatment. They set up diagnostic stations at city gates. Anyone entering Strasbourg is examined for signs of humoral imbalance. Travelers are warned about the hot blood epidemic. Some are detained for precautionary dancing treatment. The city essentially quarantines itself, but not to keep the condition from spreading out. To keep potentially infected people from leaving before they receive proper medical care. The economic consequences are catastrophic. Most businesses have shut down because their workers are either dancing, dead, or too traumatized to function. The markets are empty because the merchant families are dealing with dancing relatives. Agricultural work has stopped because farmers are abandoning their fields to bring family members to the city for dancing treatment. Food shortages begin developing, which the doctors explain as another symptom of the hot blood epidemic. According to their updated medical theory, the humoral imbalance is affecting the entire region's natural systems. Crop failures, livestock illness, even changes in weather patterns are all connected to the massive outbreak of hot blood syndrome. The cure, obviously, is more dancing. They expand the treatment area to include the surrounding countryside. They encourage rural communities to establish their own dancing facilities. They send medical missionaries to neighboring villages to help identify and treat hot blood cases before they become severe enough to require transportation to Strasbourg. By late August, there are reports of dancing outbreaks in at least 6 nearby towns, all following Strasbourg's medical protocols. all supervised by doctors trained in the hot blood treatment methodology, all resulting in mounting death tolls that are carefully documented as evidence of successful humoral rebalancing. The religious authorities, who had initially deferred to medical expertise, are now seriously concerned that they're witnessing something supernatural. The Bishop of Strasbourg starts conducting investigations into whether demonic forces might be involved. But the doctors have an answer for this too. They explain that demons are attracted to humoral imbalances. The reason supernatural forces seem to be present is because untreated hot blood syndrome creates spiritual vulnerability. The dancing treatment doesn't just cure the medical condition. It also provides protection against demonic influence. So religious concerns actually support the medical approach. The dancing must continue for both physical and spiritual health. Meanwhile, the actual dancers are reaching levels of physical deterioration that would be shocking even by medieval standards. People who have been dancing for weeks are basically walking skeletons. Their skin hangs loose on their frames. Their eyes are sunken and glassy. Their movements have become mechanical and jerky. They look more like animated corpses than living human beings. But according to the medical authorities, this is all part of the healing process. The more severe the physical deterioration, the more progress the patient is making toward humoral balance. The goal isn't to preserve the physical body. The goal is to achieve perfect equilibrium between the four humors, even if that equilibrium can only be maintained after death. By this point, Strasbourg has become an international curiosity. Scholars, doctors, and government officials from across Europe are traveling to witness this unprecedented medical phenomenon. Some come to learn from Strasbourg's innovative treatment methods. Others come to document what they're increasingly convinced is either divine intervention or demonic possession. All of them leave with stories that will spread throughout the continent, creating the foundation for similar outbreaks in other cities. The dancing plague is about to go viral, medieval style. By this point, the city of Strasbourg is literally tearing itself apart from the inside. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean families are physically fighting each other in the streets. City officials are barricaded in their homes. Religious leaders are calling for armed intervention. And the medical authorities are doubling down on their treatment protocols while bodies pile up around them. Let's start with the families. Because nothing destroys family relationships quite like watching your loved ones dance themselves to death while doctors insist this is perfectly normal medical treatment. Picture trying to have a rational conversation with your spouse about whether your teenage daughter should continue her therapeutic dancing when she's been going for 2 weeks straight. She weighs about 70 pounds now. Her feet are bloody stumps. She hasn't spoken a coherent word in days. But the doctors say stopping the treatment could kill her. So do you forcibly remove her from the dancing area and risk her death? Or do you watch her continue dancing and guarantee her death? These are the impossible choices that hundreds of families are facing every single day. Some families choose intervention. They organize rescue missions to physically drag their dancing relatives away from the treatment areas. This leads to violent confrontations with the medical supervisors, who are legally obligated to prevent interference with ongoing medical treatment. We're talking about literal street battles. Fathers fighting doctors with farming tools. Mothers throwing rocks at medical assistants. Siblings forming armed groups to raid the dancing platforms. The city guard is called in to maintain order, but half of them have family members in the dancing program. So they're torn between their civic duties and their personal desperation. Other families choose compliance. They continue supporting the medical authorities. They keep bringing food and water to their dancing relatives. They attend the educational lectures about hot blood syndrome. They even recruit additional family members who might be showing early symptoms. These families develop an almost cult-like devotion to the treatment program. They see any criticism of the dancing therapy as personal attacks on their decision-making. They form support groups that meet regularly to reinforce each other's commitment to following medical advice, no matter how horrifying the results become. The conflict between these two groups creates a civil war within the city. Pro-treatment families attack anti-treatment families. Anti-treatment families sabotage dancing facilities. Both groups lobby city officials for support. Both groups organize public demonstrations. Both groups claim moral authority based on protecting their loved ones. The city council, meanwhile, is facing its own internal crisis. Some members are beginning to question whether they made the right decision supporting the dancing treatment program. The death toll is now over 60 people. The economic damage is catastrophic. Other cities are starting to avoid trade relationships with Strasbourg. Nobody wants to risk catching whatever plague is affecting the city. But admitting that the medical authorities were wrong would mean taking responsibility for those 60 deaths. It would mean acknowledging that the city government actively participated in killing its own citizens. It would probably mean the end of their political careers. Possibly even criminal prosecution for negligent homicide. So instead of admitting error, the city council splits into factions. Some members secretly try to undermine the dancing program through bureaucratic sabotage. They delay funding requests. They create regulatory obstacles. They accidentally schedule maintenance work that disrupts dancing activities. Other members become even more supportive of the medical authorities. They increase funding for the program. They expand facilities. They create new policies that make it harder for families to interfere with treatment. The religious establishment is having its own crisis of authority. The Catholic Church's official position is that healing comes from God. Medical treatment is acceptable as long as it doesn't conflict with divine will. But the dancing plague raises fundamental theological questions. If the dancing is medical treatment, why are people dying? If the dancing is divine punishment, why are doctors encouraging it? If the dancing is demonic possession, why aren't exorcisms working? The Bishop of Strasbourg initially supported the medical approach. But as the death toll climbs, he starts having serious doubts. He begins conducting private investigations into whether supernatural forces might be involved. He consults with other bishops. He reviews church doctrine about possession and divine intervention. He even considers calling for a formal theological investigation. But the medical authorities push back hard against religious interference. They argue that supernatural explanations undermine scientific progress. They claim that religious intervention could actually make the medical condition worse. They suggest that the church is overstepping its authority by questioning university-trained physicians. This creates a power struggle between religious and medical authorities. Each group claims ultimate authority over the dancing situation. Each group accuses the other of incompetence or malicious interference. Each group demands exclusive control over treatment decisions. The general population is caught in the middle of all these conflicts. They don't know who to trust. Medical experts are saying one thing. Religious leaders are saying another. City officials are saying different things depending on which faction they support. Families are split between different approaches. Meanwhile, people continue dying. The dancing continues. The music never stops. And everyone involved is trapped in a system that has become too politically and psychologically complex to abandon. Even though it's clearly not working. Even though it's obviously killing people. Even though everyone can see that the situation is spiraling completely out of control. The stage is set for someone to propose an even more drastic solution. One that will make everything that's happened so far look like a minor medical miscalculation. When the death toll reaches 80 people and the city is basically in open civil war, you'd think someone might suggest, hey, maybe we should try a completely different approach. But no. Instead, the medical and religious authorities decide that what this situation really needs is more extreme interventions. Because apparently the problem isn't that their treatment is killing people. The problem is that their treatment isn't aggressive enough. The medical authorities, who are now under intense pressure to show results, develop what they call enhanced therapeutic protocols. These involve physically restraining dancers who appear to be underperforming in their treatment. They design special harnesses and chains. These keep the dancers upright and force them to continue moving even when they collapse from exhaustion. Picture medieval exercise equipment. Except instead of helping people get fit, it's designed to prevent people from stopping their deadly dance therapy. They call these devices humeral balancing apparatus. They're basically torture instruments with medical names. The doctors explain that some patients develop resistance to standard dancing treatment. Their bodies try to protect the imbalanced humors by shutting down. The enhanced protocols overcome this resistance. They ensure that the therapeutic dancing continues until proper humoral equilibrium is achieved. They also start experimenting with combination therapies. Dancing plus bloodletting. Dancing plus purging. Dancing plus trepanation, which involves drilling holes in the skull to release evil humors. Some dancers are subjected to all three treatments simultaneously. They dance while blood pours from their arms. While they vomit from induced purging. While cerebrospinal fluid leaks from holes drilled in their heads. The medical authorities document all of this as cutting-edge research into advanced humoral medicine. The religious authorities, not to be outdone, decide that the situation requires increasingly dramatic spiritual interventions. The local priests start performing mass exorcisms. Not just on individual dancers, but on the entire dancing area. They set up altars around the platforms. They burn massive amounts of incense. They chant Latin prayers continuously. They sprinkle holy water on the dancers every few hours. When this doesn't work, they escalate to more extreme measures. They organize public processions, carrying religious relics through the dancing areas. They bring in specialized exorcist priests from other cities. These priests have experience dealing with particularly stubborn cases of demonic possession. They use techniques like forced religious recitation, making dancers memorize and repeat prayers while continuing their therapeutic movement. Some priests advocate for physical purification. They recommend beating the dancers with blessed rods. This will drive out both demons and excess humor simultaneously. Other priests prefer psychological approaches. They position themselves next to dancing patients. They shout biblical passages directly into their ears for hours at a time. The theory is that demonic forces can't tolerate prolonged exposure to scripture. So continuous religious bombardment will eventually force the evil spirits to abandon their human hosts. But the most dramatic religious intervention comes when the bishop decides that the situation requires divine intervention on a massive scale. He organizes a citywide pilgrimage to the shrine of Saint Vitus, who is the patron saint of dancers and epileptics. The plan is to transport all 400 dancing patients on carts and wagons, take them to the shrine about 20 miles outside the city, and pray for miraculous healing. This is logistically insane. We're talking about moving 400 people who can't control their own movements, many of whom are severely injured and malnourished, some of whom are dying, loading them onto medieval transportation, and dragging them across rough countryside roads, for a 20-mile journey that will take several days, while they continue dancing the entire time. The medical authorities initially object to this plan. They argue that interrupting the therapeutic dancing could be medically dangerous. But the bishop convinces them that combining medical treatment with divine intervention could enhance the healing process. The dancers can continue their humoral balancing therapy during the pilgrimage, while simultaneously receiving spiritual purification from proximity to Saint Vitus's sacred relics. It's like combination medical-religious therapy, the most advanced treatment available in 1518. The city officials enthusiastically support this plan, because it gets the dancing problem out of Strasbourg temporarily. It shows that they're taking decisive action. And if people die during the pilgrimage, well, that's clearly God's will rather than failed municipal policy. Families are told that the pilgrimage represents their loved one's best chance for recovery. Any family that refuses to send their dancing relatives will be considered responsible for obstructing medical treatment and potentially preventing divine healing. The preparations for this pilgrimage are absolutely surreal. They construct special carts with restraining devices to keep dancers from falling off during transport. They hire guards to prevent dancers from escaping or family members from interfering. They organize supply trains with food, water, and medical equipment. They recruit priests to provide continuous religious services during the journey. They even hire additional musicians to ensure that the therapeutic dancing music never stops, not even while traveling. By early September, everything is ready for what the authorities are calling the Great Healing Pilgrimage. A convoy of 400 dying dancers, dozens of medical supervisors, multiple priests, armed guards, musicians, and enough supplies for a small army, all heading toward a shrine that may or may not exist, in search of a miracle cure for a condition that may or may not be real. What could possibly go wrong? This is the moment when the dancing plague reaches its absolute peak of medieval absurdity. Because instead of acknowledging that their treatments have been killing people, the authorities have decided that what the situation really needs is a road trip, with dancing, and prayers, and armed guards to prevent anyone from using common sense. Now we arrive at the part of this story that is so completely insane that even medieval chroniclers, people who regularly wrote about dragons and unicorns, people who thought that maps should include warnings about sea monsters, even these guys were like, I don't know if anyone's going to believe this. Because what happens during the Great Healing Pilgrimage defies every rational expectation about human behavior, about government competence, about basic survival instincts. The convoy leaves Strasbourg on September 1st, 1518. Picture this scene. 400 people who can't control their own movements, loaded onto wooden carts like cargo, still dancing, still jerking and spinning and flailing, while being transported across medieval roads that are basically just dirt tracks with occasional rocks. The carts are bouncing, the dancers are dancing, the musicians are playing, the priests are praying, and the whole procession is moving at about 2 miles per hour. because you can't exactly maintain highway speeds when your passengers are having continuous seizures. The historical records describe this pilgrimage in detail. And here's where it gets absolutely unbelievable. The chroniclers document that during the journey, the dancing becomes more intense. Not less intense. More intense. They describe dancers whose movements become so violent that they have to be tied down to prevent them from throwing themselves off the moving carts. We're talking about people who are essentially having full-body convulsions, while bound with ropes, while traveling across rough terrain. 4 days. The medical supervisors interpret this escalation as a positive sign. They believe that proximity to St. Vitus's shrine is drawing out the excess humors more aggressively. The more violent the dancing becomes, the more successful the treatment is proving to be. They start documenting different categories of pilgrimage-enhanced dancing. Some dancers develop what they call rotational intensification, where their spinning movements become so rapid that observers report difficulty following them with their eyes. Other dancers exhibit percussive amplification, where their foot stomping becomes so forceful that it actually damages the wooden cart floors. Still others show signs of gravitational defiance, where their jumping movements seem to lift them higher and higher off the ground. The priests traveling with the convoy see all of this as clear evidence of divine intervention. They believe that St. Vitus is already beginning to work miracles. Even before the pilgrims reach his shrine, they start conducting continuous blessing ceremonies. They sprinkle holy water on the dancers every hour. They perform communion services while the carts are moving. They even attempt to conduct confession sessions with dancers who are mid-convulsion. By the second day of travel, the death rate accelerates dramatically. People are dying faster than the convoy can bury them. The official count reaches 15 deaths in a single day. But instead of treating this as a medical emergency, the authorities interpret it as spiritual breakthrough. They announce that St. Vitus is calling the most severely afflicted pilgrims home to eternal rest. The deaths aren't treatment failures. They're evidence of successful divine intervention. The families traveling with the convoy are forced to leave their dead relatives buried in shallow graves along the pilgrimage route, because stopping for proper funeral services would interfere with the ongoing medical spiritual treatment of the surviving dancers. When the convoy finally reaches the shrine of St. Vitus on September 3rd, the scene that greets them is absolutely surreal. We're talking about roughly 300 surviving dancers, because about 100 people have died during the 2-day journey. These survivors are arranged around the shrine in what can only be described as a medieval death circle, still dancing, still jerking and convulsing. But now their movements are even more extreme than before. The priests immediately begin conducting mass healing ceremonies. They carry religious relics directly into the crowd of dancers. They perform group exorcisms. They organize communal prayers involving hundreds of participants. The medical authorities start documenting what they believe are miraculous improvements. They claim that some dancers are showing signs of humoral rebalancing. Their movements are becoming more coordinated. Their breathing is stabilizing. Their spiritual auras are brightening. But what actually happens is that more people die. A lot more people. The combination of extreme physical exhaustion, severe dehydration, malnutrition, religious trauma, and psychological breakdown creates a perfect storm of human mortality. On September 4th, the official death count reaches 43 people in a single day. September 5th sees 51 deaths. September 6th brings the highest single-day total. 67 people die in 24 hours. The historical records describe piles of bodies around the shrine. Families wailing in grief while their surviving relatives continue dancing among the corpses. Priests frantically performing last rites on people who are still moving in violent convulsions. Medical supervisors taking detailed notes about the progression of humoral balancing in patients who are clearly dying. By September 7th, fewer than 150 of the original 400 dancers are still alive. The shrine of St. Vitus looks like a medieval battlefield. Bodies everywhere. Exhausted families. Traumatized religious officials. And a small group of surviving dancers who continue their relentless, mechanical movements, completely oblivious to the carnage surrounding them. This is the moment when even the most dedicated supporters of the dancing treatment start to question whether something has gone terribly wrong. But instead of abandoning their approach, they decide that what the situation really needs is one final, desperate intervention. Because apparently watching 250 people die in a week isn't enough evidence that maybe, just maybe, prescribing dancing as medicine for people who can't stop dancing might not be the most brilliant medical strategy in human history. Here's where this story gets even more disturbing. Because what happened in Strasbourg wasn't some unique, isolated incident. It wasn't a one-time psychological breakdown that happened to affect one city. No. The dancing plague of 1518 was actually part of a much larger pattern of similar outbreaks that had been happening across Europe for over 200 years, and that continued happening for decades afterward. Which means we're not dealing with a random medical mystery. We're dealing with something that reveals fundamental truths about human psychology, about mass hysteria, about how crowds can literally dance themselves to death. Let me blow your mind with some historical context. The first recorded dancing epidemic happened in 1237 in the town of Erfurt, where dozens of children started dancing uncontrollably, and danced until many of them died. In 1278, a bridge over the Rhine River collapsed, because too many people gathered on it to watch a group of dancers, who couldn't stop moving. Over 200 people drowned, but the dancers kept dancing, even as bodies floated downstream beneath them. In 1374, just 144 years before Strasbourg, a massive dancing outbreak affected thousands of people across multiple cities in present-day Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. We're talking about simultaneous epidemics in dozens of towns, all following the same pattern. People start dancing. Authorities try medical treatments. More people join the dancing. Everyone dies or recovers mysteriously. But here's what makes the 1374 outbreak particularly relevant to our Strasbourg story. The medical authorities in those cities used almost identical treatment approaches. They diagnosed hot blood syndrome. They prescribed more dancing as the cure. They built public stages and hired musicians. They created municipal dancing programs. And they achieved almost identical results. Hundreds of deaths, economic collapse, social trauma, and detailed medical records documenting the success of therapeutic dancing. It's like they had a playbook for how to turn a psychological crisis into a government-sanctioned mass casualty event. The historical records from these earlier outbreaks influenced how Strasbourg authorities responded in 1518. Medieval medical texts specifically referenced the 1374 dancing epidemics as successful examples of humoral balancing therapy. University-trained physicians learned about dancing treatment protocols from studying these earlier cases, which means the doctors in Strasbourg weren't making up their approach. They were following established medical precedent, based on documented historical successes that had killed thousands of people, but were still considered cutting-edge medicine. Even more disturbing is what happened after Strasbourg, because the successful treatment methods used in 1518 became the new standard for addressing dancing outbreaks. Medical schools started teaching dancing therapy as an advanced technique for treating humoral imbalances. Cities across the Holy Roman Empire established emergency protocols for potential dancing epidemics, complete with pre-approved budgets for stage construction, professional musician contracts, and religious consultation procedures. In 1536, 18 years after Strasbourg, a similar outbreak occurred in Basel. The authorities immediately implemented the Strasbourg protocols. They built stages. They hired musicians. They organized religious pilgrimages. They achieved similar results. Dozens of deaths, municipal financial crisis, and detailed documentation praising the effectiveness of evidence-based dancing therapy. This pattern repeated in Metz in 1552, in Cologne in 1564, in dozens of smaller towns throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. Each outbreak followed the same progression. Individual psychological crisis escalates into mass hysteria. Authorities apply established medical treatments. Treatment protocols amplify the original problem. Death toll climbs while officials document therapeutic success. Social trauma persists for generations. But here's the really terrifying part. These dancing epidemics weren't caused by demons, or divine punishment, or mysterious medieval diseases. Modern psychologists recognize them as textbook cases of mass psychogenic illness, also known as epidemic hysteria. This is a well-documented psychological phenomenon, where stress, anxiety, and social tension combine with suggestion and peer pressure to create symptoms that spread through communities, like psychological contagion. We see the same thing today in modern outbreaks of mass fainting, collective anxiety attacks, social media-driven behavioral epidemics. The difference is that modern authorities usually recognize these as psychological phenomena and respond with psychological interventions, rather than prescribing more of the problematic behavior as medical treatment. The dancing plagues reveal something disturbing about human nature. When people are stressed, frightened, and looking for authority figures to provide answers, they'll accept almost any explanation, no matter how irrational. And they'll follow almost any treatment, no matter how harmful, as long as it comes from respected experts, who speak with confidence and use sophisticated terminology. The medical authorities in these dancing epidemics weren't evil. They genuinely believed they were helping people. They were following the best available scientific knowledge. They were applying treatments that had worked in previous cases. They documented their results carefully. They modified their approaches based on new evidence. They did everything that modern medical professionals are supposed to do, except they were working from fundamentally flawed assumptions about human psychology, medical causation, and appropriate treatment methods, which made their careful, professional, evidence-based approach more dangerous than random folk remedies. Because when authority figures confidently prescribe harmful treatments, people trust them. People follow their advice. People ignore obvious warning signs. People continue participating in programs that are clearly killing them, because surely the experts know what they're doing. Surely the authorities wouldn't endorse something dangerous. Surely all these deaths must be part of some larger medical plan. That will eventually make sense. The dancing plagues weren't medieval curiosities. They were warnings about the dangers of unquestioned expertise, mass psychological manipulation, and the human tendency to follow authority, even when that authority is leading them off a cliff. And here we arrive at the absolute peak of medieval absurdity, because after watching 250 people die during a religious pilgrimage, after documenting the complete failure of every medical intervention, after seeing families destroyed and a city's economy collapsed, the authorities decide that what this situation really needs is one final, desperate escalation that will make everything that came before look like reasonable policy decisions. On September 8th, with fewer than 150 dancers still alive at the shrine of St. Vitus, the surviving medical and religious authorities hold an emergency council to determine why their treatment protocols haven't achieved the expected results. Their conclusion is breathtaking in its wrongness. They decide that the problem isn't with their approach. The problem is that they haven't been aggressive enough. The hot blood syndrome affecting Strasbourg is apparently more severe than any previously recorded case. It requires unprecedented treatment intensity to achieve proper humoral balance. So they develop what they call the final purification protocol. This involves combining every available medieval treatment into one comprehensive therapeutic assault on the remaining dancers' imbalanced humors. We're talking about simultaneous dancing, bloodletting, purging, trepanation, exorcism, and forced religious recitation, while the patients are chained to prevent them from escaping treatment. And musicians play continuously to maintain therapeutic rhythm. The logistics of this final protocol are absolutely insane. They construct a circular platform around the shrine, with individual restraining stations for each surviving dancer. Each station is equipped with medical implements for bloodletting and purging, religious texts for forced recitation, and mechanical devices to ensure continuous dancing motion. Even when the patients lose consciousness, the medical authorities explain that this comprehensive approach will address humoral imbalances from multiple therapeutic directions simultaneously. Hot blood will be cooled through dancing and bloodletting. Excess bile will be expelled through purging and spiritual cleansing. Demonic influences will be driven out through exorcism and religious bombardment. And mechanical assistance will ensure that treatment continues until complete humoral equilibrium is achieved, or until the patient dies, whichever comes first. The implementation of this final protocol creates scenes that medieval chroniclers struggle to describe without using words like hellish and apocalyptic. Picture 150 people chained to wooden posts, blood streaming from their arms where physicians have opened veins, vomit and waste covering the ground from induced purging, holes drilled in their skulls leaking cerebrospinal fluid, while they continue dancing in mechanical, jerky movements, and priests shout Latin prayers directly into their faces, while musicians play frantic dance music, while families watch in horror from behind rope barriers. The death rate during this final protocol is catastrophic. We're talking about 30 to 40 people dying every day. But the authorities interpret each death as evidence that the treatment is working more aggressively than expected. They document the various stages of final humoral balancing, the progression from violent dancing to peaceful death, the spiritual transformation visible in patients' faces, as their souls are purified through comprehensive medical intervention. By September 12th, fewer than 50 dancers remain alive. By September 15th, the number drops to about 20. By September 18th, only 7 people are still dancing. The medical authorities are ecstatic, because this represents a 98% treatment success rate. By their calculations, sure, most of the patients died during treatment, but they died with perfectly balanced humors, which is the ultimate goal of medieval medicine. The surviving 7 dancers become objects of intense medical fascination. Doctors from across Europe travel to study these patients, who have survived the most comprehensive humoral balancing therapy ever attempted in medical history. They're considered living proof that advanced dancing treatment actually works, when applied with sufficient intensity and professional expertise. But then something completely unexpected happens. On September 20th, without any warning or explanation, the remaining 7 dancers just stop. Not gradually, not slowly winding down. They stop mid-movement, all at the same time. They look around confused. They ask where they are. They ask what happened to their families. They show no memory of the past 2 months, of the dancing, of the pilgrimage, of watching hundreds of people die around them. It's like they've just woken up from a nightmare that lasted 9 weeks and killed over 400 people. The medical authorities immediately claim credit for this miraculous recovery. They announce that their comprehensive treatment protocols have finally achieved complete therapeutic success. The patients' humors are now perfectly balanced. Their hot blood has been cooled. Their excess bile has been expelled. Their spiritual purification is complete. They organize celebration ceremonies to commemorate this breakthrough in medieval medical science. The religious authorities declare the recovery a divine miracle. They attribute the healing to Saint Vitus's intervention, combined with their intensive spiritual purification efforts. They start planning to establish a permanent shrine to commemorate this demonstration of divine power. Working through advanced medical therapy, the city officials immediately begin planning their return to Strasbourg. They're eager to share news of this medical triumph with the surviving population, and to begin rebuilding their city's economy around their new reputation as a center of cutting-edge dancing therapy. But as the convoy prepares to leave the shrine of Saint Vitus, with their 7 miraculous survivors, and the bodies of over 400 dead pilgrims, nobody seems to be asking the obvious question. If the treatment was so successful, why did 98% of the patients have to die? To achieve humoral balance? And why did the surviving patients recover only after all the medical interventions stopped? These questions won't be seriously investigated for another 400 years, when psychologists finally develop frameworks for understanding mass hysteria and the dangers of authority-sanctioned harmful treatments. But in September 1518, everyone involved is too busy celebrating their medical breakthrough to worry about minor details, like the hundreds of corpses scattered across the countryside between Strasbourg and the shrine of Saint Vitus. When the triumphant convoy returns to Strasbourg on September 25, 1518, the scene that greets them is nothing like the celebration the authorities had been expecting. Because while they've been busy conducting their successful medical breakthrough at the shrine of Saint Vitus, the city they left behind has become a ghost town, haunted by trauma, economic collapse, and the growing realization that maybe, just maybe, something went catastrophically wrong. Picture this homecoming. A convoy that left with 400 dancing patients returns with 7 confused survivors, and stories about the greatest medical triumph in medieval history. The city officials are expecting parades. The medical authorities are expecting academic acclaim. The religious leaders are expecting Thanksgiving ceremonies. Instead, they're greeted by empty streets, shuttered businesses, and families who spent the past month burying empty coffins because their loved ones died somewhere along a pilgrimage route and were left in unmarked graves. The population of Strasbourg has dropped from roughly 20,000 people to about 15,000. We're talking about a 25% population decline in less than 3 months. Not from war, not from plague, not from natural disaster, but from municipal dancing policy. Entire families have been wiped out. Entire neighborhoods have been abandoned. Entire economic sectors have collapsed, because the breadwinners, the skilled workers, the community leaders, all danced themselves to death. With official government support, the returning authorities immediately begin organizing public presentations to explain their medical breakthrough to the surviving population. They set up stages in the main square, the same square where this whole nightmare began. They bring in their 7 recovered patients. as living proof of successful treatment. They prepare detailed lectures about humoral balancing therapy, advanced dancing techniques, and the miraculous intervention of Saint Vitus. But when they start these presentations, something very different happens than what they expected. Instead of grateful audiences celebrating medical progress, they face angry crowds demanding explanations for where their family members are, why the city treasury is bankrupt, why their economy has collapsed, why their neighbors are dead. The families of the deceased don't want to hear about humoral balance. They want to know why their children, parents, siblings were transported 20 miles away to die in a field, while doctors took notes about therapeutic progress. The surviving merchants don't want to hear about divine intervention. They want to know how they're supposed to rebuild businesses when their customer base has been decimated and their supply chains have been destroyed. The religious community doesn't want to hear about miraculous recoveries. They want to know why God allowed 400 people to die during what was supposed to be a holy pilgrimage. The medical authorities try to maintain their professional composure. They explain that some patient loss is inevitable during advanced therapeutic procedures. They compare the dancing treatment to other medical interventions like surgery or bloodletting, where deaths are unfortunate but expected complications. They insist that the 7 successful recoveries prove the validity of their approach, and that the knowledge gained from this treatment program will help save lives in future dancing epidemics. But the crowd isn't buying these explanations, because unlike university-trained physicians, regular people can see obvious cause and effect relationships. When you encourage people who can't stop dancing to dance more vigorously, with professional musical accompaniment, those people tend to die from exhaustion. This isn't complicated medical theory. This is basic common sense. The city officials try a different approach. They emphasize the civic pride that Strasbourg should feel for becoming a center of medical innovation. They talk about the international recognition the city has received for its progressive healthcare policies. They mention the delegations from other cities who came to study Strasbourg's treatment methods. They suggest that economic recovery will be boosted by medical tourism, as other dancing epidemic victims come to Strasbourg for treatment. This argument goes over about as well as you'd expect, with families who just buried multiple relatives. The crowd starts getting genuinely angry. People begin shouting about government incompetence, medical malpractice, religious manipulation, criminal negligence. Some families demand financial compensation for the loss of their breadwinners. Others call for criminal prosecution of the officials who approved the dancing programs. Still others organize boycotts of any remaining medical or religious authorities who supported the treatment protocols. The 7 recovered dancers, meanwhile, are experiencing their own psychological crisis because they have no memory of the past 2 months, but they're slowly learning about the hundreds of people who died around them during their recovery. They're discovering that their families spent their life savings on food and medical supplies for the pilgrimage. They're finding out that their friends, neighbors, relatives are dead because of a condition that they somehow survived. The psychological trauma of survivors' guilt, combined with complete memory loss, creates a perfect storm of mental health problems that medieval society has no framework for addressing. Some of the survivors withdraw completely from social interaction. Others develop what we would recognize as severe anxiety disorders. Still others begin showing signs of depression and suicidal ideation. But all of this is interpreted by the remaining medical authorities as evidence of ongoing humoral imbalances that require additional therapeutic intervention. By early October, it becomes clear that the city of Strasbourg cannot continue operating under its current leadership. The economic damage is too severe. The social trauma is too widespread. The political legitimacy is too compromised. City council members start resigning. Medical authorities start leaving for other cities. Religious leaders start requesting transfers. And the general population starts demanding complete reorganization of municipal government. This is the moment when the dancing plague of 1518 finally begins to end. Not because of successful medical treatment, not because of divine intervention, not because of effective government policy, but because the entire system that created the disaster collapses under the weight of its own incompetence, and the surviving population finally says, enough. Now here's where this story gets even more disturbing, because you'd think that after 400 people died from following medical advice to dance themselves to death, someone might write down a record saying, hey, maybe we made some mistakes here. But no, the way this event was documented and remembered shows just how powerful institutional denial can be, when the alternative is admitting that respected authorities killed hundreds of their own citizens. The official medical records from Strasbourg describe the dancing plague as a successful case study in advanced humoral balancing therapy. These documents, written by the surviving physicians, emphasize the innovative treatment approaches, the international recognition, the ultimate recovery of 7 patients from what they describe as the most severe case of hot blood syndrome ever recorded. They frame the high mortality rate as evidence of how serious the condition was, rather than evidence of how wrong their treatment was. According to these medical chronicles, the deaths weren't treatment failures. They were inevitable casualties of a naturally deadly disease that would have killed even more people without proper medical intervention. The doctors actually calculated mortality statistics to prove their point. They estimated that untreated hot blood syndrome has a 100% fatality rate, so achieving a 1.75% survival rate through dancing therapy represents a 98.25% improvement over natural disease progression. This is medieval medical statistics applied to justify mass death through mathematical manipulation. The religious authorities developed their own interpretation of what happened during the pilgrimage. According to church records, the dancing plague was a divine test of faith, medical knowledge, and community solidarity. The deaths were God's way of calling home the most spiritually pure souls, while leaving behind those who still needed earthly experience for their salvation. The recovery of the 7 survivors was a clear miracle, demonstrating God's approval of the combined medical-religious treatment approach. The church recommended that similar protocols be established in other cities as preparation for future divine tests. The city government, meanwhile, commissioned official histories that emphasize Strasbourg's leadership in innovative crisis management. These documents describe the dancing epidemic as an unprecedented challenge that required creative solutions and unprecedented civic cooperation. They praise the decision-making process, the resource allocation, the interdepartmental coordination, and the ultimate successful resolution of a complex medical emergency. They recommend that other cities study Strasbourg's management model for implementation during future crises. But here's what makes all of this documentation absolutely mind-blowing. None of these official records mention the possibility that maybe encouraging people who can't stop dancing to dance more vigorously with professional musical accompaniment might not be optimal medical treatment. This isn't just omission. This is active intellectual denial of obvious cause and effect relationships. The medical schools throughout the Holy Roman Empire begin teaching the Strasbourg protocols as advanced techniques for treating mass hysteria and humoral imbalances. Students learn detailed procedures for stage construction, musician recruitment, religious coordination, and patient monitoring. During intensive dancing therapy, the University of Basel establishes a special program in epidemic dancing treatment based entirely on Strasbourg's methods. Other universities send delegations to study the surviving medical records and interview the physicians who developed these innovative approaches. By 1525, just 7 years after the original outbreak, dancing therapy has become standard medical practice for treating psychological epidemics. Throughout Central Europe, cities establish emergency protocols with pre-approved budgets for rapid stage construction and professional musician contracts. When similar outbreaks occur, the surviving families of the dancing plague victims face an impossible psychological situation because the official narrative from medical, religious, and government authorities insists that their loved ones died from natural disease progression, despite receiving the best available treatment. Any family that suggests the treatment itself was harmful is accused of undermining medical progress and divine will. So most families just accept the official explanation. They participate in memorial services, celebrating their relatives' contribution to medical science. They attend lectures about the importance of dancing therapy. They even donate money to fund research into improved treatment protocols. This creates a kind of collective Stockholm syndrome, where the victims' families become advocates for the system that killed their relatives. The 7 survivors, meanwhile, become living symbols of medical triumph. They're invited to speak at medical conferences. They participate in demonstration programs, showing other cities how successful dancing treatment can achieve complete recovery. They travel throughout Europe as celebrity patients, proving that intensive humoral balancing therapy actually works when applied correctly. None of them ever recover their memories of the dancing period, but they're trained to give standardized presentations about their experience and their gratitude for the medical care they received. By 1550, the dancing plague of Strasbourg is remembered as one of the great medical successes of the early 16th century, a triumph of scientific thinking over superstition and folk medicine, proof that university-trained physicians, using evidence-based treatment protocols, can achieve results that previous generations would have considered miraculous. The story gets taught in medical schools as an example of how persistence, professional collaboration, and innovative thinking can overcome even the most challenging medical emergencies. Students learn about the importance of following established protocols, even when family members and untrained observers question professional judgment. This is how institutional authority protects itself from accountability, by controlling the narrative, redefining failure as success, and teaching the next generation that questioning expert judgment is dangerous and irresponsible. The dancing plague wasn't just a medical disaster, it was a masterclass in how respected institutions can maintain their authority, even after catastrophic failures, by simply refusing to admit that anything went wrong. So let's take a step back from this medieval nightmare and talk about why this story should absolutely terrify anyone living in the 21st century. Because here's the thing, the psychological and social dynamics that created the dancing plague of 1518 haven't disappeared. They've just put on modern clothes and learned to use social media. Think about this for a second. We just watched an entire city convince itself that encouraging people who couldn't stop dancing to dance more vigorously was brilliant medical treatment, and that 400 deaths were evidence of therapeutic success. Now ask yourself, what's the modern equivalent of respected authorities giving catastrophically bad advice with complete confidence while people die and everyone pretends everything is fine? I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with pandemic response. But let's start with something more fun, like TikTok challenges, because the dancing plague of 1518 is basically the medieval version of viral social media trends that encourage dangerous behavior. Picture this scenario. Someone posts a video of themselves doing something weird and dangerous. Other people copy it because they want to be part of the trend. Authorities initially dismiss it as harmless fun. Then people start getting seriously injured. So authorities create official guidelines for safe participation in the dangerous trend, which legitimizes the behavior and encourages more people to join, until emergency rooms are flooded with people injured from following official safety protocols for inherently unsafe activities. Sound familiar? We've seen this exact pattern with everything from the Tide Pod Challenge to the Skullbreaker Challenge to various pranks that involve deliberately causing psychological trauma. The only difference between medieval dancing plagues and modern viral challenges is that we have better emergency medical care, so fewer people die from following stupid trends. But the underlying psychology is identical. Social pressure plus authority endorsement plus groupthink equals mass stupidity with potentially fatal consequences. Or let's talk about flash mobs, which are literally organized group dancing in public spaces that spreads through social networks and occasionally results in injuries when too many people show up, or when participants get carried away and continue dancing beyond safe limits. The main difference between flash mobs and the dancing plague of 1518 is that modern flash mobs usually have designated end times, and modern authorities usually don't prescribe more dancing as treatment for people who can't stop dancing, usually. But the social dynamics are almost identical. People see others doing something unusual. They want to participate. They ignore obvious risks. They continue participating, even when things go wrong, because stopping would mean admitting they made bad decisions. And the crowd momentum makes individual rational thinking Nearly impossible. Here's another modern parallel. Cryptocurrency bubbles, where respected financial experts encourage people to invest in obviously worthless digital assets by explaining complex economic theories about blockchain technology and decentralized finance and digital scarcity, while people lose their life savings following professional investment advice. That sounds sophisticated, but is fundamentally based on the same logic as medieval humoral medicine. If some dancing is good medicine, more dancing must be better medicine. Becomes, if some Bitcoin investment is profitable, more Bitcoin investment must be more profitable. The confidence, the technical terminology, the appeal to expertise, the dismissal of skepticism, the redefinition of failure as success, is the exact same pattern, just with different vocabulary. Social media influencers are basically medieval doctors, with better marketing budgets, and the people who follow them, off financial cliffs, are the modern equivalent of dancing plague victims, who trusted university-trained physicians to know what they were doing. But here's the most disturbing parallel: modern wellness culture, an alternative medicine that prescribes increasingly extreme treatments for people who aren't getting better from initial interventions. Sound familiar? The reason your yoga therapy isn't working is because you're not doing enough yoga. Try hot yoga. Try aerial yoga. Try goat yoga. Try yoga combined with essential oils, and crystal healing, and juice cleansing. And if you're still not cured, obviously you need more intensive treatment. Maybe you should try a week-long retreat, where you do nothing but yoga, while fasting, and consuming only blessed water. This is literally medieval dancing therapy logic, applied to modern holistic health. The more the initial treatment fails, the more intensive the follow-up treatment becomes, until people are spending their life savings on increasingly extreme interventions that make them sicker, while authorities document each deterioration as evidence of therapeutic progress. Even our political discourse follows dancing plague patterns, where tribal loyalty overrides obvious evidence that preferred policies aren't working. The reason our approach isn't solving the problem is because we're not applying it aggressively enough. We need more of the same approach, but with greater intensity. And anyone who questions this logic is undermining our progress. Whether it's economic policy, military intervention, drug prohibition, or pandemic management, the pattern is always the same. Authority figures propose solutions. Solutions fail spectacularly. Authorities recommend more intensive versions of the same failed solutions, while redefining failure as progress and attacking critics as enemies of expertise. The dancing plague of 1518 wasn't a medieval curiosity. It was a preview of how humans behave when social pressure, authority worship, and groupthink override basic survival instincts. And we've been repeating the same patterns for 500 years, just with better technology and more sophisticated rationalization. The good news is that understanding these patterns can help us recognize them when they're happening. The bad news is that most people would rather dance themselves to death than admit they've been following catastrophically bad advice from respected authorities who speak with confidence about subjects they don't understand. Some things never change. We just get better at documenting our stupidity in real time. So what exactly are we supposed to learn from this absolutely bonkers story about 400 people dancing themselves to death because medieval doctors thought hot blood syndrome could be cured with more dancing? Well, buckle up, because the lessons here are way more disturbing than you probably want them to be. First lesson: never trust anyone who responds to a problem by recommending more of what caused the problem. This seems obvious, right? If someone can't stop dancing, don't prescribe more dancing. If someone is addicted to gambling, don't recommend more gambling as therapy. If someone is drowning, don't throw them into deeper water. But apparently this logic doesn't apply when the person giving the advice has impressive credentials and speaks with authority about complex theoretical frameworks. Medieval doctors weren't stupid. They were university educated. They had studied for years. They had extensive knowledge of medical theory and practice. They could cite precedents from previous successful treatments. They used sophisticated terminology. They documented their results carefully. They collaborated with religious And government authorities, they did everything that modern experts are supposed to do, except their fundamental assumptions about human physiology were completely wrong, which made their expertise more dangerous than ignorance, because when ignorant people give bad advice, nobody listens to them. But when respected experts give bad advice with confidence, people follow that advice right off a cliff. Second lesson: beware of authorities who redefine failure as success through creative interpretation of statistical data. The Strasbourg doctors achieved a 98.25% mortality rate, but they called it a 1.75% success rate. This isn't just semantic wordplay. This is psychological manipulation that allows institutions to maintain authority even after catastrophic failures. Modern examples are everywhere. Military leaders who describe disastrous interventions as strategic victories, economic advisors who claim that market crashes are healthy corrections, public health officials who insist that rising death tolls prove their policies are working, because without intervention, the death tolls would be higher. Politicians who argue that increasing problems show their solutions are needed, rather than evidence their solutions aren't working. The mathematical logic is always the same. Compare actual results to hypothetical worst-case scenarios, then claim credit for the difference, no matter how bad the actual results are. Third lesson: question anyone who demands loyalty to expertise itself rather than results. The medieval authorities didn't say, "Trust us because our treatment works." They said, "Trust us because we're experts." And questioning expertise is dangerous and irresponsible. This is a classic manipulation technique that turns legitimate criticism into attacks on institutional authority rather than discussions about effectiveness. When someone's primary argument for why you should follow their advice is their credentials rather than their track record, that's a red flag, the size of a medieval banner. Fourth lesson: recognize mass hysteria before it becomes mass death. The dancing plague started with one person's psychological crisis. It escalated into citywide disaster because authorities amplified rather than contained the original problem. Mass hysteria is a real phenomenon that spreads through social networks when people see others engaging in unusual behavior, and when authorities legitimize that behavior rather than providing calm, rational leadership. Modern mass hysteria looks different than medieval dancing, but the pattern is identical. Unusual behavior spreads through social contagion. Authorities provide explanations that make the behavior seem normal. More people join the behavior because it's been normalized. Critics are dismissed as lacking understanding of the complex factors involved. The behavior continues until external forces stop the cycle, or until everyone involved is dead or traumatized. Fifth lesson: the most dangerous people in any crisis are those who refuse to admit mistakes, even when bodies pile up around their decisions. The Strasbourg authorities never acknowledged that their treatment approach might have been wrong. They maintained that dancing therapy was effective right up until the last dancer died. They documented their methods as medical breakthroughs. They trained other cities to use similar approaches. They created institutional knowledge based on catastrophic failure, and they passed that knowledge to the next generation as established best practice. This is how bad ideas become entrenched in institutional culture, not through conspiracy, but through the simple refusal of respected authorities to admit error, even when the evidence of that error is overwhelming and undeniable. Final lesson: sometimes the smartest thing you can do is ignore expert advice and trust your common sense. Medieval peasants who watched people dance themselves to death and thought maybe we should try getting them to stop dancing had better medical intuition than university-trained physicians who prescribed more dancing as treatment for excessive dancing. Your grandmother who looks at cryptocurrency and says this seems like a pyramid scheme with computers has better financial judgment than Harvard MBAs who explain blockchain technology for 3 hours before recommending you invest your retirement savings in digital monkey pictures. Sometimes complexity is just a way to hide simple stupidity behind impressive vocabulary, and when respected experts are confidently recommending obviously stupid solutions to serious problems, the smartest response isn't to trust their expertise, it's to run in the opposite direction as fast as possible before they decide you need treatment too. The dancing plague of 1518 killed 400 people because they trusted experts instead of common sense. Don't be a dancing plague victim in whatever form your generation's dancing plague happens to take. Trust your instincts, question authority, and remember that just because someone has fancy credentials doesn't mean they know what they're talking about. Sometimes the person with the most education is the most dangerous person in the room. Speaking of trusting experts and catastrophically bad medical advice, and authorities who make disastrous situations worse through confident intervention, I got another story for you that's going to make the dancing plague of 1518 look like a minor medical miscalculation. Because what happens when an entire civilization decides that the best way to improve public health is to deliberately poison their entire population with a substance that causes brain damage, violent behavior, and mass psychosis while marketing it as a health tonic? I'm talking about the great lead poisoning of ancient Rome, where the most powerful empire in human history slowly drove itself insane by consuming massive amounts of lead acetate, which they called sugar of lead because it made their wine taste sweeter. Picture this scenario. The Roman Empire, at the height of its power, controls most of the known world, has advanced engineering, sophisticated government, professional military, complex trade networks, and a standard of living that won't be matched again for over 1,000 years. These are not primitive people. These are the most technologically advanced civilization on the planet, and they decide that the perfect addition to their already impressive culture is systematic lead consumption in their water, in their wine, in their cooking pots, in their cosmetics, in their medicine. Romans were consuming so much lead on a daily basis that modern archaeologists can identify Roman burial sites just by testing the lead levels in the soil. We're talking about lead concentrations in Roman bones that are 100 times higher than natural background levels, enough to cause severe neurological damage in modern populations. But here's where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. Roman medical authorities actually recommended increased lead consumption as treatment for various ailments. They believed that lead acetate could cure stomach problems, improve mental clarity, enhance physical strength, and promote longevity. Roman physicians would literally prescribe higher doses of lead for patients who were showing symptoms of lead poisoning. This is dancing plague logic applied to heavy metal toxicity. The reason your lead medicine isn't working is because you're not taking enough lead. Try drinking more lead-sweetened wine with your lead-cooked food from your lead-lined dishes while wearing lead-based makeup. And if you're still not feeling better, obviously you need more intensive lead therapy. And just like in Strasbourg, the more the treatment failed, the more confident the authorities became that they were on the right track. The symptoms of chronic lead poisoning include violent behavior, paranoia, impaired judgment, inability to think clearly, and increasingly erratic decision-making, which explains a lot about late Roman emperors who declared war on the ocean, appointed their horses to government positions, and thought that burning their own capital city was excellent urban planning. But the really terrifying part is how long this went on. We're not talking about a few months of bad policy decisions like the dancing plague. We're talking about centuries of systematic self-poisoning by the most advanced civilization on Earth, while medical experts documented the health benefits of increased lead consumption, and government officials invested public resources in expanding lead production to meet growing demand for therapeutic lead products. The parallels to modern environmental and medical disasters are absolutely chilling, because we're still doing exactly the same thing with different chemicals. We're still trusting profit-motivated industries to self-regulate dangerous products. We're still allowing marketing campaigns, to masquerade as scientific research. We're still ignoring obvious warning signs because authorities assure us that everything is fine, and we're still consuming substances that future archaeologists will probably use to identify our burial sites by their toxic residue levels. So next time, we're going to explore how the Roman Empire literally poisoned itself into collapse while convincing itself that lead consumption was the key to continued prosperity. We'll talk about how Roman engineers designed sophisticated systems for distributing lead-contaminated water throughout their cities, how Roman winemakers developed advanced techniques for maximizing lead content in their products, how Roman doctors created detailed treatment protocols for lead-based medicine, and how Roman politicians made policy decisions about lead regulation while suffering from severe lead-induced brain damage. It's a story about how expertise can become institutionalized stupidity, how economic interests can override public health, how cultural practices can become death cults, and how even the most sophisticated civilizations in history can poison themselves into extinction, while their best and brightest document the process as scientific progress, because apparently humans have been trusting dangerous experts, making catastrophically bad decisions, and refusing to admit obvious mistakes for a lot longer than just 500 years. The Romans managed to systematically poison their entire civilization for over 400 years while maintaining complete confidence in their medical and engineering expertise. If that doesn't keep you awake at night thinking about what modern lead pipes we might be ignoring, then you haven't been paying attention to the lessons of history. So make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and get ready for another journey into the depths of human stupidity disguised as institutional wisdom. Because trust me, the Roman lead story makes the dancing plague look like a minor administrative oversight. By comparison, we're talking about an entire empire dancing itself to death with chemistry instead of choreography. And there you have it, the complete, absolutely insane, true story of how a single woman's mysterious dancing turned into a city-sanctioned mass death event that killed over 400 people in just 2 months, all because medieval authorities decided that the best cure for uncontrollable dancing was more dancing with professional musical accompaniment and government funding. I know this sounds like something I made up for entertainment purposes, but every detail of this story is documented in historical records from multiple sources. We have city council minutes, medical case studies, religious chronicles, financial records, and eyewitness accounts, all confirming that yes, this actually happened. An entire city literally danced itself into near extinction, while experts documented the whole process as a medical breakthrough. The dancing plague of 1518 isn't just a weird historical curiosity, it's a warning about what happens when people stop thinking critically and start trusting authority more than their own eyes. It's a lesson about how social pressure can override basic survival instincts. It's a demonstration of how respected institutions can maintain credibility even after catastrophic failures by simply refusing to acknowledge that anything went wrong. But most importantly, it's a reminder that the same psychological dynamics that created this medieval disaster are still operating in our modern world. We're still vulnerable to mass hysteria. We're still susceptible to authority worship. We're still capable of following obviously bad advice because it comes from impressive sounding sources. The only difference between 1518 and today is that we have better technology for documenting our collective stupidity in real time. So the next time someone with fancy credentials starts recommending solutions that seem obviously counterproductive, remember Frau Trophia. Remember the 400 people who died dancing because they trusted medieval medical experts who spoke with confidence about subjects they didn't understand. Remember that sometimes the smartest response to expert advice is to run in the opposite direction, as fast as possible, before you become the subject of someone else's historical cautionary tale. Now, I know some of you are sitting there thinking, this could never happen in our modern, scientifically advanced society. And to those people, I say, really? Have you been paying attention to the past few years? Because we've watched entire populations follow obviously contradictory public health advice. We've seen people invest their life savings in digital assets that exist only as computer code. We've witnessed mass adoption of social media platforms that are explicitly designed to harvest personal data and manipulate behavior. We've observed political movements that convince millions of people to vote against their own economic interests based on increasingly bizarre conspiracy theories. The dancing plague never ended. It just learned to use better marketing and more sophisticated rationalization techniques. But here's the good news. Understanding these patterns can help you recognize them when they're happening to you or to people around you. Knowledge is the best defense against manipulation. Critical thinking is the most effective vaccine against mass hysteria, and historical perspective is the ultimate cure for believing that this time is different. So if you enjoyed this deep dive into medieval madness and modern parallels, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because I've got dozens more stories about respected authorities making catastrophically bad decisions. With complete confidence, we're going to explore how ancient Rome poisoned itself into collapse with lead-based health tonics, how medieval doctors treated mental illness by drilling holes in people's skulls, how 19th century physicians prescribed cocaine as a cure for depression and morphine as treatment for cocaine addiction, how early 20th century public health officials promoted cigarettes as lung medicine and radioactivity as general wellness therapy. The rabbit hole of institutional stupidity goes deeper than you can possibly imagine, and every story has modern parallels that will make you question everything you think you know about trusting expert consensus. Also, hit that like button if this story made you think twice about following advice just because it comes from authoritative sources. And definitely leave a comment telling me about the most obviously stupid expert advice you've ever encountered. I read every comment, and I'm genuinely curious about what modern dancing plagues you've witnessed in your own lifetime. Whether it's financial bubbles, health fads, political movements, technology adoption, or social trends, I bet you've seen at least one example of masses of people following obviously bad advice because respected authorities said it was the smart thing to do. Share your stories in the comments below, because recognizing these patterns is the first step toward not becoming a victim of the next dancing plague, whatever form it happens to take. Remember, history doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes, and the people who don't learn from historical mistakes are doomed to dance themselves to death, while experts take notes about their progress. Thanks for watching. Stay skeptical, trust your instincts, and I'll see you in the next video, where we'll explore another fascinating example of how smart people can make spectacularly stupid decisions when they trust institutional authority more than common sense. Until then, keep questioning everything, especially when the people giving advice have the most to gain from you following it.